The hangar was never truly quiet, not even at dawn. Somewhere in the rafters, a single fluorescent light flickered with a faint hum, mixing with the distant whir of a generator and the occasional metallic clink of a dropped tool. The air carried a cocktail of machine oil, burned hydraulic fluid, and that cold metallic tongue that seemed to seep into the skin after a while. Sergeant Claire Nolan was on her knees beside the H-64 Apache, her dark hair tied in a no-nonsense bun beneath a faded ball cap. She wasn't in a rush, not because she lacked urgency, but because she respected the machine. Her hands moved with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Every screw she loosened was placed in a neat line on the work mat. Every part she set aside was angled so she could reassemble the weapon blindfolded, if she had to. The M230 chain gun sat in front of her like a patient on an operating table. She had stripped it down to its bones, the 30mm barrel assembly, the recoil adapters, the drive gears, each component revealing hints of wear and tear invisible to the untrained eye. Her gloves were off. She preferred feeling the cool steel under her fingertips, the subtle imperfections, the faint burrs that might one day jam the feed. Outside, the faint wop-wop of distant rotor blades drifted in through the open hangar doors. Somewhere on the other side of the airfield, crews were prepping for the morning's live fire exercise. The schedule said the exercise wouldn't start for another hour, but in the military, an hour's warning might as well mean start now. Claire had been in hangars like this since she was 19. In the 12 years since, she had maintained everything from Humvees to UH-60 Black Hawks. But the Apache was personal. It wasn't just a helicopter. It was a predator in the sky, an extension of the pilot's will. And if you respected it, it would protect you. If you didn't, it could fail you when you needed it most. She leaned over the chain gun, eyes narrowing at a faint carbon streak inside the receiver housing. A tiny flaw, but left unchecked, it could throw off accuracy by a fraction. And in combat, a fraction could mean the difference between hitting a target and hitting a family. She reached for a brass brush and began working the residue loose, each motion firm but controlled. That was when she felt it, not a sound, but a presence. Bootsteps, slow and heavy, crunching faintly on the hangar floor. The rhythm told her. It wasn't one of the junior crew, too deliberate. She didn't look up immediately. Most people learned that you didn't interrupt her mid-maintenance unless something was on fire. The steps stopped just a few feet behind her. A moment of silence stretched in the air, thicker than the smell of oil dot. Then she heard the inhale. A sharp, almost involuntary breath, like someone seeing something they weren't prepared to see. Claire reached for a torque wrench, her eyes still fixed on the weapon. "You need something?" she asked, her tone flat but not unfriendly. But the voice that answered was not casual. "Where did you get that?" Her brow furrowed slightly. She turned her head just enough to see him, Chief Warrant Officer Mark Grayson, standing rigid, eyes locked on her left shoulder. The patch dot, it was an old thing, edges frayed, the colors dulled from sun and time. Black background, crimson falcon wings arched downward into a V, a single white star stitched dead. Center. The design was simple, but the weight it carried was anything but. She'd forgotten she was even wearing it. It wasn't part of the official uniform. She'd sewn it onto her coverall herself years ago, long before transferring to this base. That her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "It's mine," she said simply. For a second he didn't speak. His gaze didn't waver, but something in it shifted, recognition mixed with disbelief. Grayson wasn't a man easily rattled. He had flown combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, survived 2 helicopter crashes, and seen friends go home in flag-draped coffins. But this was different. That patch wasn't just rare. It was a ghost. It belonged to a unit that officially didn't exist. A unit he had flown cover for, once, during a mission gone horribly wrong. A unit where, according to every record he'd ever seen, no one had made it out alive. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. That patch. It's from her. Head tilted slightly, almost in warning. I know where it's from. Silence fell between them again. Somewhere in the hangar, a pneumatic drill whined for a few seconds, then died. Outside, the distant rotors grew louder. The rest of the crew moved in their usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing in a single conversation by the Apache's nose. Grayson studied her face. She didn't look like someone who'd been in that mission. She didn't have the hollowed out eyes of a survivor carrying ghosts. But there was something in the way she stood, the way she held herself, balanced, ready, like she could react to a threat in half a heartbeat. Finally, she turned back to the chain gun, slotting the receiver back into place with a practiced motion. Her message was clear. Conversation over. But for Grayson, it had only just started. Chief Warrant Officer Mark Grayson had seen that insignia only once in his entire career, and that single encounter had been enough to burn it into his memory forever. He'd been 28 then, fresh into his second deployment in Afghanistan. He'd flown escort for a unit, so far off the books that their existence was never acknowledged in any briefing. They didn't operate in platoons or companies. They worked in shadows. No names, no ranks on file. The men and women in that unit didn't wear standard patches. They wore the Falcon, black background, crimson wings arched in a V, the white star in the center. The day he saw it, they'd been gearing up for an operation near the Pakistani border. The mission was a nightmare, even before it began. Rescue hostages from a compound deep in hostile territory with no air cover except for his bird and a single Kawewa. The weather was against them. Intel was sketchy, and their window for extraction was measured in minutes. He'd never seen operators move like they did that night. Silent, coordinated, absolutely lethal. And among them had been one figure slightly shorter than the rest. A woman, helmet on, visor down, voice calm over the comms as she relayed real-time adjustments to their route. The tone had stuck with him. Cold precision layered over quiet urgency. The mission had turned bad fast. They got the hostages out, but a Taliban ambush cut off their escape route. Grayson and the Kiowa swooped in, guns blazing, but the enemy was everywhere. In the chaos, the woman's voice came over his headset, not panicked, not yelling, just giving coordinates, vector adjustments, and timing that kept his Apache moving just ahead of enemy fire. It was the only reason they made it out alive. But the operators on the ground didn't, or so he'd been told. Every single one listed as Kiao. The unit dissolved, officially erased. The patch, that black and crimson Falcon, disappeared from the army overnight, until now. And now, it was sewn onto the sleeve of a maintenance sergeant, in a dusty hangar on an airfield in Arizona, like it belonged there. Grayson took another step forward, his shadow falling across her tools. That's not just a patch, he said quietly. Claire didn't stop working. She aligned a mounting bracket against the gun's receiver, slid in the first bolt, and began tightening it in slow, even turns. It's mine, she repeated, her tone calm but carrying a faint edge, the kind of edge that warned people not to push too far. His jaw clenched. You don't just get one of those. They're not sold at the PX. You have to earn it. I did. The simplicity of her reply made his stomach twist. He wanted to believe it, but the math didn't add up. She wasn't on any rosters from that mission. Her service record, at least what was available to him, showed nothing but standard maintenance assignments. No combat deployments, no cross-training with special operations, nothing that screamed, Ghost Unit. You were in the Falcon unit? He pressed, keeping his voice low enough that the other mechanics, still busy with their own tasks, wouldn't overhear. Her hands paused for just a fraction of a second, the tiniest hitch in her otherwise fluid movements. Then she resumed tightening the bolt. "We didn't call ourselves that." Grayson felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. That was exactly the kind of answer someone from that unit would give. The Falcon wasn't a name. It was a mark. And the people who wore it never talked about it unless they had to. "You were in Afghanistan," he said, more a statement than a question. Claire's eyes flicked up to meet his. "A lot of people were in Afghanistan." He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. This was like trying to interrogate a locked safe. And yet, there was something in her eyes. Not defiance, not hostility, something heavier. The look of someone who'd carried a truth so long that letting go of even a fragment felt dangerous. The background noise of the hangar felt distant now. Every sound, the hiss of a compressor, the clank of a dropped wrench, the faint chatter of another crew, faded into the periphery. In this small pocket of space between the Apaches, Nose and the open hangar door, it was just the two of them, locked in a silent tug-of-war. Grayson shifted his weight. "The last time I saw that patch, the person wearing it was giving me coordinates, while her team was being cut down around her." For the first time, something changed in Claire's expression. A shadow crossed her face, subtle but there, the flicker of a memory she didn't want to relive. "He took a gamble. That was you." She looked away, focusing on slotting the recoil adapter into place. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the tremor in her voice was microscopic, barely perceptible, and exactly enough to confirm what he suspected. Grayson had been in the army long enough to know when to press and when to let something go. Right now, he could feel both instincts fighting each other. Every part of him wanted to demand answers, to pull the truth out of her. But another part, the part that understood what it was like to survive something no one else could imagine, pulled him to back off. Still, he couldn't help himself from saying one last thing. "If it was you, then you saved my life that night." Her hands slowed. She set the torque wrench down, wiped her palms on a rag, and stood. She was almost his height, her posture straight, her eyes now level with his. "You should probably forget about that night," she said quietly, "and forget about me. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even cold. It was final." She picked up the maintenance log, scribbled a note in her tight, efficient handwriting, and handed it to him. Her fingers brushed his for just a second. There was no tremor in her touch, no sign of nerves. Then she turned back to the gun, bent over, and resumed work as if the conversation had never happened. Grayson stood there for several seconds, the log in his hand, unsure whether he was more unsettled by the fact that she was alive, or by the realization that whatever had happened to her unit, she'd carried it alone all these years without anyone knowing. He'd seen men crack under far less. And now here she was, repairing the very weapon he'd be flying in less than an hour, wearing the ghost of a past that no one dared speak of. If she was telling the truth, she wasn't just a mechanic. She was a survivor of something the Army had buried so deep that even saying its name out loud might still be dangerous. And if she wasn't telling the truth, then she just lied about something no one should lie about. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had brought her here wasn't over. And deep down, a part of him already knew it wouldn't stay buried for long. The hangar was alive with motion, but to Grayson, it felt like he was standing in a bubble of stillness. Mechanics shouted for tools. Forklifts beeped in reverse. Someone's playlist crackled faintly from a portable speaker in the corner, but none of it penetrated the noise in his head. He was back there again. Back in the dust and darkness of Kandahar, 2013. It had been one of those nights you don't forget, even if you want to. The air had been so thick with grit, It coated the inside of his mouth. The moon was just a thin shard in the sky, barely enough to outline the jagged silhouettes of the mountains. His Apache had been flying low, hugging the terrain, every nerve on fire. The call had come over secure comms mid-flight, a special operations unit pinned down, hostages in tow, trying to break through an enemy blockade. His orders were simple: provide air cover until they made it to the exfil point. But nothing about that night was simple. From the moment he heard the first voice on the net, he knew this wasn't a standard rescue. It wasn't the team leader who gave him directions. It was her. A calm, measured female voice that never wavered, even as the gunfire in the background sounded like hail on sheet metal. 2 clicks south, you'll see a break in the ridge. Take it, she'd said. Her instructions came in rapid bursts, perfectly timed. She called out enemy positions before they even came into view on his sensors. She had an awareness of the battlefield that felt almost unnatural. And then, chaos. The extraction plan fell apart when a second wave of hostiles came in from the east, cutting the unit off. His Kiowa escort took a hit and spiraled down into the darkness. Grayson banked hard, his 30mm chain gun thundering, spitting fire into the night. Hold. Your current course. Her voice cut in, sharper now. 3 tangos at your 11, 70 meters. They've got an RPG. He adjusted, fired, and watched the target vanish in a blossom of light. She was saving him as much as he was saving them. But the ground team was collapsing. Over the net, he heard voices yelling, the distant pop of grenades, someone screaming. For a medic. Through it all, she kept giving him coordinates, steady, surgical, as if the entire world depended on those words being precise. And then, the last transmission. Coordinates marked. Get them out. Her voice was quieter then, almost drowned by the roar of small arms fire. Seconds later, the line went dead. The official report said the team didn't make it. Hostages were recovered, but the operators were killed in the fight. No bodies returned. No funerals. Just names on a classified list that no one outside a small circle ever saw. And he'd believed it until this morning, when he saw that patch on Claire's shoulder. Back in the present, Grayson found himself staring at her again, almost certain now she was the voice. He bet his career on it. But how did she go from being part of the most secretive combat unit he'd ever worked with to wrenching on helicopters in a dusty stateside hangar? He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the others couldn't hear. You were in Kandahar. Claire didn't look up. She was checking the tension on a mounting bracket, her expression unreadable. A lot of people were in Kandahar. You guided us in, he pressed. That night, the Ridge, the RPG team, you were the one feeding me coordinates. Her jaw tightened just enough for him to notice. You should be more careful with your memories, Chief. He wasn't backing down. The Army said no one made it out alive. Her hands stilled on the weapon for half a second. Then she set down the torque wrench, slowly, as if considering her next move. She turned toward him, her gaze sharp. Do I look dead to you? It wasn't bravado. She wasn't smirking. If anything, there was a faint, tired edge to her voice, like she'd had this conversation before, and it had never ended well. Grayson studied her face. The years since Kandahar had left their marks in ways that didn't show up in photographs. A faint scar just below her jawline. The way her eyes scanned a space without her having to think about it. A readiness in her stance that no maintenance tech needed, unless they'd spent years expecting trouble from every corner. You disappeared, he said. Or maybe, she countered, I was somewhere you weren't supposed to look. There. It was again, that wall. Not anger, not even hostility. Just a refusal to open a door she clearly intended to keep locked. Before he could push again, A shout came from across the hangar. "Chief, 10 mics to pre-flight." Grayson looked. Over his shoulder, one of the younger crewmen was waving him toward the briefing room. He turned back, but Claire had already shifted her attention back to the chain gun, checking the feed system with deliberate focus. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "I don't forget people who save my life." She didn't look up. "Good. Then you'll remember to keep your mouth shut." It wasn't a threat. It was advice. And something in her tone made him believe she was doing it for his sake, not hers. As he walked toward the briefing room, he kept glancing back. At her. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. The other mechanics moved around her without a second thought, unaware they were brushing past someone whose history could fill classified files thicker than the maintenance logs they handled daily. He thought about that night in Kandahar again. The way her voice had cut through the chaos, the way her directions had kept him alive. And now, standing in a hangar thousands of miles away, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to her unit hadn't been the end of her story. If anything, it felt like it was still playing out, and he just stumbled back into it. Grayson didn't know it yet, but the next few hours would strip away the last layer of separation between their past and present. Because out beyond the airfield's perimeter, something was already moving toward them. And when it arrived, the ghosts of Kandahar would walk right back into the daylight. The morning sun had just cleared the eastern ridgeline, spilling gold light across the tarmac, when the first siren split the air. It wasn't the short, routine buzz used for training calls. This was the long, sustained wail that froze people mid-step and sent adrenaline surging before the brain even caught up. Grayson stopped halfway through the briefing room door. Across the hangar, mechanics and techs paused, tools in hand. Even Claire's head lifted from the Apache's chain. "Gun." Then the voice came over the loudspeakers, clipped, urgent, with none of the casual tone used during drills. "Attention all personnel. Unidentified aerial contacts inbound. This is not an exercise. Repeat, not an exercise. All flight crews report for scramble." The hangar exploded into motion. Pilots sprinted toward their aircraft, maintenance teams scattered to clear pathways. Tool carts rattled as they were shoved aside. A forklift operator swerved to avoid a line of ground crew sprinting toward the fuel trucks. Grayson's boots pounded the hangar floor as he made for the Apache. "Status on 2-1? He called, already knowing who would answer. Claire was still standing by the weapon note, her gloves already on again. Guns ready, feed systems clean. "I just locked her up." He climbed into the cockpit, strapping in as the auxiliary power unit whined to life. "Any idea what's coming?" She didn't answer right away. She was scanning the sky beyond the open hangar doors. Her eyes weren't moving randomly. They swept in methodical arcs, the way a seasoned lookout scanned a kill zone. Finally, she said, "You'll know soon enough." Grayson was halfway through his pre-flight checks when a faint buzz cut through the background noise, high-pitched, irregular, and growing louder. His targeting display lit up with multiple pings just outside visual range. "Contacts," came the tower's voice over the cone. "Looks like drones. Multiple, small profiles, high speed, erratic patterns. No transponders." The younger pilots on the net sounded confused, even a little rattled. Drones weren't unheard of around training ranges. Sometimes civilians flew them too close out of ignorance. But this was different. Too many, too coordinated. Grayson flipped on the targeting systems, his hands moving on instinct. "You locking me into the range exercise feed tower?" "Negative, Chief. This isn't part of today's schedule." That landed in his gut like a stone. He caught sight of Claire again, but instead of moving to the safety zone like the other maintenance crew, she was crossing the tarmac toward the ground crew cum station. "Hey, He barked over the cockpit mic. "You're supposed to be clear of the pad." She didn't even glance back. "And take me off the pad," she replied calmly, plugging herself into the station. A few seconds later, a new voice cut into his headset. Her voice. "Targeting solution uploading. Pattern Delta 4. The words froze him for a heartbeat. He hadn't heard that phrase since Kandahar. It wasn't standard Army doctrine. It was a maneuver used by her old unit, a rolling attack pattern, designed to flush fast-moving targets into a kill box. He keyed the mic. "You know what you're doing?" "Better question," she replied evenly, "is whether you do." His targeting screen updated with a firing sequence and matched the one she'd just called out. Without thinking, his hands moved into position. First pass, 20-millimeter bursts from the chain gun, timed exactly to the drone's projected. Paths. Second pass, hellfires, not for destruction, but for hurting. She was playing them like chess pieces. And it was working. The first wave of drones flashed into visual range, their tiny frames glinting in the sunlight. He squeezed the trigger, felt the Apache shudder as the M230 barked out short, controlled bursts. 2 drones disintegrated mid-air, scattering debris. Across the range, Claire's voice was calm in his ear. 3 more at your high right. They'll try to split. Don't chase, hold the angle. He obeyed. The 3rd and 4th drones veered right into his crosshairs. 1 burst, 2 kills. The 5th juked hard, but before it could recover, a hellfire tracked and detonated 10 meters off its nose, sending it tumbling. On the ground, the rest of the crews were still scrambling to get airborne. A Kiowa was just lifting off, a Black Hawk spinning up its rotors. But Grayson had the advantage, Claire's advantage. Between attacks, he keyed the mic. "Who's feeding you these solutions?" "Me," she replied. "Same as last time." Last time, Kandahar. The realization hit hard. She wasn't just improvising. She was running the same mental calculations she'd used years ago in that mountainside firefight. But here, on a dusty training range half a world away, and she was still perfect. The second wave came in lower, faster. Claire adjusted instantly. "Drop altitude by 20 feet. Use your nose to push them left." Grayson's HUD blinked with an updated path. He followed it, forcing the drones into each other's flight lines. 2 collided and fell in a twisted heap to the desert floor. The last drone tried to climb for altitude, maybe to get above his line of fire, but she was already ahead of. It climbed 10 degrees, 1 second burst. He did exactly that. The M230 coughed once, and the drone shattered. Silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the whir of the rotors and the faint crackle of static over the comm. "Tower," Grayson said, "all contacts neutralized." A beat later, the reply came. "Copy that. Good shooting, 2-1. Recovery crews are en route." He cut power to the weapon systems, the hum fading to quiet. Down on the tarmac, Claire was unplugging from the con station. She coiled the headset cable neatly, set it aside, and picked up her toolbox like nothing unusual had happened. Grayson landed and climbed out, meeting her halfway. "You're supposed to be a mechanic," he said. "I am," she replied without slowing. "That wasn't a mechanic talking me through that fight." She stopped just long enough to look at him. "Maybe you should stop trying to figure out what I am and focus on what's coming next." Before he could respond, she was already walking back into the hangar. Grayson stood there a moment, feeling the desert heat seep through his flight suit. In his gut, he knew 2 things. 1, the patch wasn't the only piece of her past she'd carried into this place. 2, whatever had just happened wasn't random. Someone had sent those drones. And someone like Claire Nolan didn't just happen to be here when they arrived. The simulator room was dark, except for the cold glow of the screens and the dull red LEDs marking the corners. The hum of the Apache's simulated cockpit filled the space, a perfect reproduction of the real thing, right down to the vibrations under the seat when the engines spooled up. Captain Harris sat in the pilot's seat, helmet on, eyes locked forward. Across from him, in the gunner's chair, was Lena. Only this time, she wasn't just a maintenance tech. She was the focus of everyone in the room. Harris, the mission coordinator, the instructor behind the glass, and the small knot of Apache crew members who'd gathered just to watch. This scenario isn't meant to be won, Harris told her through the intercom, his voice tight. It's a worst-case engagement. Double a threat, no air cover, multiple fast movers inbound. We normally run it to test systems, not skill. Lena's lips curved faintly. Then it's perfect. The simulator kicked to life. The desert sprawled ahead, bathed in the harsh orange of a low sun. Radar pings lit up like Christmas lights. Hostile contacts, close and closing fast. Harris banked left, Lena's hands already moving over the simulated weapon controls with quick precision. Incoming from 3 o'clock, Harris called. Eyes on, she replied. The M230 chain gun on the HUD pivoted smoothly. Lena didn't hesitate. A burst of fire stitched across the lead vehicle in the convoy below, the targeting reticle. Rock steady. The instructor behind the glass leaned toward the screen, eyes narrowing. That's perfect lead calculation. Who the hell taught her that? She said she learned on the range, muttered one of the crew watching, but they didn't sound convinced. The sim threw its first curveball. A SAM launch warning screamed through the cockpit. Harris dumped flares and broke hard, but Lena was already switching weapons. Hellfires locked onto the launch site before the dust of their evasive turn even cleared. Target 2. Gone, Lena said simply as the explosion bloomed in the distance. The mission tempo escalated. 2 enemy rotorcraft broke over the ridge, flying low and fast. Harris sucked in a sharp breath. The sim's AI wasn't pulling. Punches today. Lena, they'll be in range in 15 seconds. I need 8, she cut in. Her voice wasn't cocky. It was cold, focused, and absolute. Her fingers danced over the controls. The simulated TADS, target acquisition and designation site feed, flickered as she tracked the first rotorcraft. She fired 1 missile. No. Corrections, and the sim registered a kill before the enemy could return fire. The second was trickier, braking hard behind a ridge. Harris moved to reposition, but Lena was already anticipating it, coaxing the missile's seeker head around. In a graceful arc that ended in another perfect hit, the room behind the glass went dead silent. Harris exhaled slowly. You don't fight like a mechanic. The mission timer on the display ticked past the point where most pilots were dead in this scenario. Harris and Lena were still flying. Another threat warning blared. A ground-based mobile artillery unit, backed by light armor, rolling into position ahead. Harris started to recommend breaking off, but stopped himself. He knew the look in her eyes now. Lena switched to rockets. Her aim surgical. Even the instructor had to mutter an impressed "damn" as the sim's kill counter climbed. By the time they reached the final objective, a heavily fortified enemy position, they were both drenched in sweat. The Apache took simulated hits, warning lights flaring in the cockpit. Systems were failing, but Lena never stopped. Her voice steady, her targeting flawless, even compensating manually when the simulated fire control system went down. When the last hostile blip vanished from the radar, the sim ended abruptly. The cockpit screens went black. Silence. The crew behind the glass just stared at her. Harris slowly removed his helmet, still breathing hard, and turned toward Lena. That wasn't possible, he said. No one's ever completed that run. No one. Lena reached up and unlatched her helmet. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, her expression unreadable. Good thing I'm not no one. It wasn't bravado, it was fact. The instructor stepped into the sim room, looking between Harris and Lena. You two just rewrote the board. But you, he nodded at Lena, you've got stick skills that aren't taught in the U.S. Army. Not like that. Lena simply shrugged, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a calculation, as though she just revealed more than she intended. And in the doorway, one of the pilots who'd been watching whispered to another, "She's not just some patch-wearing mechanic. She's flown before. I'd bet my wings on it." The patch on her shoulder, the one that had made Harris go silent days earlier, suddenly seemed a lot less mysterious, and a lot more dangerous. Because whatever Lena had done, before stepping onto this base, it hadn't been maintenance. The storm didn't wait for them to be ready. It began with a ripple in the distance, a thin, metallic streak cutting across the low clouds, followed by the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of rotor blades. But this wasn't an Apache's sound. It was higher-pitched, erratic. Sam's eyes narrowed. "Drones," she muttered, almost to herself. Captain Reynolds swung toward her. "What kind?" "Armed. Probably recon and strike models, Chinese design," she replied without hesitation. "Fast, small radar signature, and they'll try to swarm us before the Apaches are off the ground." Before anyone could respond, the base siren shrieked. The radio in Reynolds' hand crackled to life. "Multiple inbound hostiles, Sector North. All available units. Prepare for engagement." The pilots scrambled, but the tarmac was chaos. Crews dashed between choppers, loading rockets, slamming ammo belts into the M230 chain guns. Sam didn't run. She walked straight to the Apache she'd been maintaining hours ago. Her movements were methodical, hands checking connections, ammunition feeds, and the fire control system with a speed born of experience. Reynolds caught her arm. "You're not flying. You're not even on the roster." Sam looked him dead in the eye. "You don't have another weapons tech who's certified on mid-air recalibration for the M230 during live fire, do you?" He hesitated. The silence between them was drowned out by the roar of engines spooling up. Finally, he released her. "Arm. Fine. You ride with me, but you follow my lead." They climbed into the cockpit. Reynolds in the pilot seat, Sam in the front as the co-pilot gunner. She strapped in, her fingers already flying over the targeting console, bringing systems online faster than the computer could register her inputs. The first swarm of drones broke over the horizon, moving in a loose crescent formation. Sam switched the flare feed to split screen, overlaying infrared over high-res optical. 14 bogies, closing fast, she called out. "Some are carrying munitions. Recommend burst fire. Aim for destabilization." "Roger that." Reynolds nosed the Apache forward, rotors biting into the humid air. The ground fell away beneath them as they accelerated. The other Apaches formed up in a rough V formation, but Sam noticed the drones weren't heading directly for them. They were angling toward the fuel depot. She didn't wait for Reynolds. "Shifting targeting." "Priority," she said, hands a blur on the console. The M230 chain gun swiveled beneath them, tracking the lead drone. Sam squeezed the trigger. The gun barked out a rapid stream of 30mm rounds. The lead drone disintegrated in a flash, shards scattering like metallic confetti. 2 more drones dove straight at them. Reynolds banked hard left, rotor tips slicing the air as Sam fired a second burst. 1 drone exploded. The other clipped their starboard stabilizer before spinning out into the desert floor. Warning lights flared across the console. "Damage." "To tail rotor control," Reynolds grunted. "Can we stay in the fight?" Sam ran a quick diagnostic. "We're good, as long as you don't plan on fancy acrobatics." They dove back toward the formation. The sky had become a chaotic ballet, Apaches and drones weaving through tracer fire and explosions. Sam's targeting was surgical. She didn't waste rounds, each burst finding a critical spot: rotors, engines, payload mounts. Then she spotted something that made her stomach tighten. A larger drone, triple the size of the others, hanging back behind the swarm. It was painted matte black, with a long underbelly that screamed missile platform. Reynolds, we've got a command drone at 5 o'clock high. If it fires, that depot is gone. He gave a tight nod. How far? 3 clicks and climbing. I'll need missile lock, but we'll have to get closer. They broke formation, engines straining as Reynolds pushed the Apache to its limit. The larger drone noticed them and began to climb, trying to keep distance. Sam armed a Hellfire missile, watching the lock-on reticle dance across the screen. Steady, steady, she whispered. A streak of gunfire whipped past their canopy, rattling the frame. 2 smaller drones had peeled off to intercept them. Sam cursed under her breath and swung the chain gun down, taking them out in quick bursts. The lock signal blared. Got you, she hissed, thumbing the release. The Hellfire shot away, its exhaust trail curling in the wind. A second later, the command drone erupted in a white-orange fireball, fragments tumbling toward the desert floor. The swarm's coordination broke instantly. Without the command drone, the smaller units scattered, easy targets for the other Apaches. Target neutralized, Sam reported, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Reynolds glanced at her between maneuvers. Remind me never to underestimate a weapons tech with a mysterious patch. She smirked, but inside her mind was still racing. The patch had been seen, the questions were already forming, and now the stakes were far higher than a single airfield. Whoever sent those drones had known exactly where to strike. And she had a pretty good idea why. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The desert was no longer silent. A dull, rhythmic thud rolled across the flat expanse, each impact sending a faint tremor through the sand. High above, the Apache's rotors clawed at the night air, the faint whine of its engines lost beneath the growl of distant gunfire. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes gripped the cyclic, eyes flicking between his HUD and the shadows that swallowed the desert floor. Behind him, Monroe sat rigid in the gunner's seat, her voice calm but clipped as she scanned for targets. On the ground below, Lena knelt beside a row of battered ammo crates, her hands moving with mechanical precision despite the chaos swelling around her. The hum of adrenaline coursed through her veins, sharpening her focus. To her left, the Apache's M230 chain gun was already prepped, but the Hydra rocket pods needed a final check, and in this environment, mistakes weren't an option. She ran her gloved fingers over the mounting brackets, the subtle vibration beneath her palm telling her the hydraulics were at full pressure. 2 minutes, Hayes' voice crackled over the coms, clipped by interference. Copy, Lena replied, not bothering to look up. She was in the zone now, every movement ingrained from years of training. But the tension was different tonight. The patch sewn into the right sleeve of her flight suit, the one Hayes had noticed earlier, felt heavier than usual, as if the fabric itself carried the weight of unfinished business. She stood, swinging one of the heavy crates toward the chopper's side bay. Her muscles protested, but she ignored the strain. Monroe's head snapped toward the horizon, her visor catching the faint flash of tracer fire. Contact, Northridge, Monroe reported. Lena didn't hesitate. She slammed the crate down, unlatched it, and began feeding the rockets into the launch pods. She could feel the heat radiating off the Apache's fuselage, smell the faint tang of JP-8 jet fuel mixing with the dry scent of the desert night. Every second here was a gamble. One stray round, and the entire berg could go up in flames. Above the din of preparation, Hayes' voice carried a new edge. They're not probing anymore. They're coming in hard. Lena glanced up, catching sight of faint movement beyond the ridge. Dark figures darting between rocks, their shapes briefly illuminated by the flare of gunfire. The rebels weren't backing down. This wasn't going to be a quick liftoff. And flyby. She pulled her sidearm from her hip, a worn M9 Beretta, and laid it on the crate beside her, just in case. The sound of boots crunching over sand pulled her attention to the left, where two ground crewmen from another team were sprinting toward her, panic etched on their faces. "East flank's compromised," one of them shouted. Lena's stomach nodded. That meant their escape route, the narrow pass they'd been counting on, was now in enemy hands. Hayes must have heard it too. Monroe, new plan. We're punching through north instead. Lena, how long? She checked the last pod, locking the final missile into place. 30 seconds. Make it 20, Hayes snapped. The urgency in his voice wasn't lost on her. She shoved the crate aside, yanked her gloves tighter, and slapped the side of the bird twice, their unspoken signal for ready to fly. The moment the rotors surged to full speed, the Apache seemed to vibrate with restrained power like a predator, coiling before the strike. But just as Lena moved to step clear, a burst of gunfire chewed into the sand barely 3 feet from her boots. She dropped instantly, the familiar reflex from her past life kicking in. She rolled behind a fuel drum, drawing her Beretta in one smooth motion. Over the comms, Monroe's voice cut through, multiple hostiles breaching the perimeter. The air changed. What had been an urgent but controlled departure became a fight for survival. Lena took a deep breath, sighted along the barrel, and squeezed off 3 rounds. 2 found their mark, the first enemy crumpling in a heap, the second tumbling sideways behind a crate. She didn't have time to confirm the third before she was on the move again, sprinting toward the Apache's ladder. Hayes leaned out of the cockpit, one hand still on the controls. "Get in!" But she didn't. Instead, she slid into the side gunner's seat, a position not meant for her, and flipped the arming switch. "You'll never clear the ridge without suppressing fire," she said over the comms. There was no argument. Monroe was already locked onto targets up north, but Lena angled the chain gun toward the eastern breach, unleashing a devastating spray that churned the sand into a storm of dust and debris. The rebels faltered, their momentum breaking under the sudden fury of 30mm rounds. The Apache's skids lifted from the ground. Sand whipped into a frenzy beneath them, stinging Lena's face through the open side. Hayes pulled them into a sharp climb, banking hard toward the ridge. The gunfire from below grew faint, replaced by the deep thrum of the rotors and the hiss of the wind. But they weren't out yet. The ridge ahead glowed faintly, with the muzzle flashes of entrenched enemy positions. Monroe loosed a burst of rockets, the explosions lighting up the night in a chain of orange fireballs. The ridge began to crumble, rocks tumbling down in a chaotic landslide. Through it all, Lena kept her fingers steady on the trigger, tracking any movement that could threaten their escape. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her hands were steady, almost too steady for someone supposedly just maintenance crew. Hayes caught it again, just like he had earlier when he first saw her patch. This wasn't her first fight, not by a long shot. They crested the ridge, the desert sprawling endlessly before them. For a moment, the danger felt distant. But Hayes knew better than to relax, and so did Lena. Behind them, the burning wreckage of the rebel positions was already fading into the darkness. But ahead lay another problem, a long flight through hostile airspace, with no guarantee they'd make it to friendly lines. Hayes glanced back at Lena. "We'll talk about that patch when we're out of here." Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was steady. "If we get out of here." The Apache roared onward, its shadow stretching across the moonlit. Sands, carrying with it 3 people who knew the fight was far from over. The Apache floated in a controlled hover over the valley, its rotor blades cutting a steady rhythm into the air. Alina's eyes scanned the ridgeline through the forward-looking infrared FLIR display, hunting for any last signs of movement. The compound below was silent, now too silent. The insurgents who'd been firing so relentlessly an hour ago had either been neutralized or had slipped away into the network of caves that spider-webbed the hillside. "Patch, talk to me." Ramirez's voice came through the comms, calm but heavy with exhaustion. Elena smirked at the nickname. The cal sign had stuck over the past hour, ever since he'd seen the patch on her sleeve, a Special Forces insignia. From a unit so classified, it was rarely spoken of even among veterans. "Clear for now," she replied, voice steady. "But that's the problem. They're not retreating, they're repositioning." Her gut told her this wasn't over. She'd been in this situation before, and it always ended the same way. False calm, then chaos. The JTAC on the ground broke in. "Raven 1, this is Talon 2-1. We've got heat signatures in the tree line, north quadrant. Looks like they're trying to circle back." "Copy," Elena said, her fingers already moving over the fire control system. "Ramirez, I'm lighting it up." The 30mm chain gun swiveled toward the tree line, and she let the targeting reticle settle over the glowing figures. With a squeeze of the trigger, the Apache roared back to life, the gun spitting precise bursts that shredded through the foliage. Figures dropped, their heat signatures flickering out one by one. Then it happened, 2 RPGs streaking up from the valley floor, twisting trails of smoke curling toward them. Ramirez yanked the cyclic, and Elena's stomach lurched as the helicopter banked hard left. The first rocket sailed past. The second detonated near their tail rotor, jolting the entire aircraft. Tails damaged, but holding. Ramirez shouted over the alarms. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. They had seconds to regain control before the damage worsened. She switched the FLIR to wide scan, hunting for the RPG team. She spotted them sprinting toward a cluster of boulders. No time for hesitation. She switched to Hellfire missiles, locked on, and launched. The missile screamed down, the explosion sending a shockwave through the valley. The Apache steadied. Ramirez exhaled, but it was too soon to relax. The ground team radioed in again. "Patch, we've got intel. Enemy commander is still in the area last known position inside that compound's main building." That explained everything: the sustained fight, the coordinated RPGs. Elena keyed her mic. "We finish this now." The compound came into view beneath them, its central structure partially collapsed from earlier strikes. But she knew from experience that even rubble could hide a tunnel entrance. Ramirez brought them lower, skimming just above the treetops. The sound of the rotor was deafening now, reverberating off the canyon walls. Elena set the gun to single-fire precision mode. The flare picked up a faint, moving shape slower than the others, staying low, crawling through debris. Whoever it was, they knew they were being hunted. "Target locked," she said. Ramirez didn't respond with words. He just gave her a sharp nod. She fired. One clean shot. The figure collapsed and didn't move again. The valley was silent for real this time. No gunfire, no movement. Just the sound of the Apache's rotors, the wind rushing past, and the distant crackle of the JTAC, confirming the area was secure. As they pulled up and away, Ramirez glanced over his shoulder at her. "You're not just some maintenance tech, are you?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She just adjusted her helmet, eyes still scanning the horizon, as if expecting another ambush. "Let's just say I fix more than weapons," she finally said, her tone carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many battles to count. They Sun was dipping behind the mountains now, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The Apache banked toward base, the mission over, but the unspoken understanding between them just beginning. Back on the tarmac, as the ground crew rushed to inspect the damage, Ramirez stayed by the cockpit, watching her climb down. "That patch," he said quietly, "it's not just special forces. It's the—" She cut him off with a small shake of her head. "Some things are better left unspoken." The rotors wound down, their roar fading into the desert night. The base lights flickered on, illuminating her as she walked away, just a shadow among shadows. Another name that would never make the headlines, but without whom the mission would have ended in disaster. And in that moment, Ramirez knew the truth. She hadn't just saved the mission. She'd saved every soul in that valley. And she'd done it with the calm precision of someone who had been there before, and would be there again.